Hello. Recent work by scientists in Edinburgh and Yorkshire, United Kingdom, has produced a simple equation termed the equation of creation, sometimes called the God equation, because it is like his own signature on his own creation. In this video, I am going to talk about the equation of creation from the perspective of a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, of which I am. However, this is not an official statement of church policy or doctrine. What it is an exciting look at one of the most truly remarkable pieces of math. So fasten your seatbelts. Here we go. In about 2009, David Cumming, who is an artificial intelligence scientist living in the United Kingdom, discovered an equation which provides direct evidence that God created the universe. This equation is both a message and an equation. It is simply the line frequency of hydrogen times pi divided by 0.01234567, and it is equal to the speed of light. To appreciate this equation, let's examine each part, starting with the numerator, the line frequency of hydrogen times pi. Okay, the first term in the equation is the line frequency of hydrogen. Hydrogen is the first element in the periodic table. It consists of one proton and one electron. It's very, very simple. It is also the most abundant element in the universe. The sun is composed mostly of hydrogen, or about 73%. It's the source of light for the entire solar system. In 1959, Italian physicist Giuseppe Cocconi and American physicist Philip Morrison thought that these qualities made the line frequency of hydrogen the perfect frequency with which to search for interstellar communications from intelligent life outside the planet Earth. Thus, the line frequency of hydrogen is used to communicate. Worldwide, the frequency has been reserved for science. No man-made transmission at this frequency is permitted, and it allows us to listen in on the universe. Could it be that if God wanted to send mankind a message, he would use the line frequency of hydrogen as the frequency to send it? In 1972, we launched the Pioneer 10, and in 1973, the Pioneer 11 spacecraft, and both of these used the wavelength of hydrogen as a standard scale of measurement. For example, the height of the woman in the image on the plaque in these spacecraft is displayed as 8 times 21 centimeters, or 168 centimeters, multiple of the line frequency of hydrogen. The line frequency of hydrogen has played a major role in our search for extraterrestrial intelligence in a project that has become known as SETI. However, because hydrogen is so abundant and a naturally occurring element, that's a problem. How do you figure out whether the message is coming from an alien intelligence or from a naturally occurring event? So Peter Makovatsky proposed that SETI use a frequency which is equal to pi times the line frequency of hydrogen, because pi is an irrational number and such a frequency could not possibly be produced in a natural way. That would clearly identify a signal as coming from an artificial origin. Said in other words, if you take the line frequency of hydrogen, multiply it by pi, you now have a frequency that can only be produced by an intelligence. Isn't that interesting that the numerator in this equation is the exact frequency with which we attempt to listen in for intelligence out there somewhere in the universe? Okay, so the top part of the fraction makes a lot of sense, but what about this omega term on the bottom representing 0.01234567 repeated forever? Well, it turns out that if you take the number 1 and divide it by 81, that's the number that you get. It's weird. It's really a weird number. But we do notice that it contains almost all of the digits from the base 10. What even gets weirder is if you will take the missing number 8 and multiply that by this number, you will then get 0.09876543.2, and then it repeats forever, meaning if you round it up, it would be 2.1. So that's pretty weird. It essentially contains all of the numbers in base 10. Well, how did Heavenly Father know that we would be communicating using base 10 in our day when this equation would be discovered? In fact, there's been a lot of different number systems over the history of mankind, but we use base 10. The number gets even weirder when you find out that the mass of the moon divided by the mass of the Earth turns out to be 1 divided by 81, or exactly this number. That is really astounding. So on the right side of the equation is the speed of light, as in E equals mc squared. Well, when Cumming found out that if you take the line frequency of hydrogen times pi, the frequency with which we are searching to communicate with extraterrestrial intelligence, and divide that by the ratio of mass of the moon to the sun, that would equal the speed of light, he was astounded. At first he didn't believe it, but later it transformed him from an atheist scientist into a believer in God, because he said only God could have created that formula. He is trying to communicate with us and send us a message that these things are his creations, and he did it. Well, David Cumming was a scientist, and he created the equation, or discovered this equation, from the perspective of a scientist. And so the speed of light is on the right-hand side of the equal sign, and that's what he found really astounding. Okay? Well, from a Latter-day Saint point of view, we could rearrange this equation and look at it slightly different, because we believe that the elements are eternal and that God simply organized or created the earth from elements that were eternal. For example, when you look at the Doctrine and Covenants, section 93, you will find that light and spirit and matter were neither created or made, neither indeed can be, but that all elements are eternal, and the spirit eternal. So if we were to take this equation and rearrange it so that we put everything that is eternal and has always existed on the left side of the equal sign, and put everything that was created or organized on the right hand side of the equal sign, we get an equation from a Latter-day Saint perspective. And guess what? It solves most of the criticisms that have been levied against this equation by people who refuse to accept that perhaps God is the creator and author of the universe. And so here we have it, the new equation. On the left side, we have the line frequency of hydrogen times pi the most simple and common substance in the universe, times the ratio of a circle's diameter to its circumference. Both of these eternal elements and principles divided by the speed of light, something that has always existed, light has always existed. And if we take those two things, the ratio of those two things, that turns out to be equal to the mass of the moon divided by the mass of the earth. How astounding is that? How incredibly astounding is that? Once this equation was linked to God, it has been vigorously criticized by those who do not believe in God, primarily based on the apparent arbitrary selection of units of measure. For instance, frequency of hydrogen is measured in cycles per what? Per seconds, per hours, per days? Even our current system of measuring time has not always been the same throughout the history of mankind. Right now, we have 24-hour interval in a day, and each hour is the same length. But when it started, there were 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of nighttime. And the day and night weren't exactly 12 hours the way we think about it. It varied, and it varied according to the season. So how do you measure time is kind of a problem. Well, what about the moon? How do you measure the mass of the moon? Well, typically in your science class, you measure mass as weight. So how much does something weigh? If one thing weighs more than another, it's got more mass. But when you're talking about moon versus Earth, that gets confusing. Let's say a person weighs 180 pounds on Earth. They get in a spaceship and they travel to the moon, and now they weigh less. And then when they come back to the Earth, they weigh more again. Have they lost mass going to the moon and gained it back coming to the Earth? No. So there needs to be a way of dealing with the moon and the Earth and mass that we don't have this problem. Critics of this formula of the equation have criticized David Cumming as arbitrarily selecting units of measure that would make the math work out. But we will see that rearranging the equation in the way that we have makes these issues tend to go away. This is because if you put the same unit of measure on the top as well as on the bottom of a fraction, the unit of measure cancels out and all you're left with is a number. For example, let's say you have a car that goes 30 miles per gallon, per meaning divided by gallons, okay? And that car uses 2 gallons. How far did it go? Well, 30 miles per gallon times 2 gallons. The gallons cancels out, and all you're left with is 30 times 2, or 60 miles. And the gallons has canceled itself out. Well, the same thing happens with this number that we have right here. The line frequency of hydrogen is measured in cycles per second, and the speed of light is measured as a distance per second, and the seconds cancel out, and pi is just a number. So that's good. The mass of the moon, it doesn't matter how you measure it. Whatever it is, divided by the mass of the Earth, the units of measure cancel out, and all you're left with is mass, a number. So we've done pretty well so far getting rid of this criticism. In fact, the only unit of measure we have left that we need to deal with would be the distance with which light travels in a second. Does it travel miles or meters? What is the unit of measure we're going to use for light? It turns out that the unit of measure that makes this equation work is something called a tom. Professor Alexander Thom was a professor of engineering at the Oxford University in the United Kingdom. Over a lifetime of research, Thom surveyed and measured over 1,000 monuments. He discovered that a unit of measure seems to have been used over and over and over again throughout the vast area that he surveyed. The Thom is equal to 0.829, etc., meters, and has been termed a megalithic yard to reflect its association with megalithic structures. Now, Thom measured primarily structures like Stonehenge in England. However, since Thom, it has been associated with the pyramids and other megalithic structures throughout the world. Thom's unit of measure has been criticized basically on two counts. One is how on earth could people all over the world end up using the same unit of measure? Well, if this has something to do with Heavenly Father and creation, that's not such a stretch to figure out. The other is that it's probably equal to the average pace of a person. It's received criticism based on that. But you know, the average pace of a person varies considerably from one spot on the globe to another. And so I don't view that as a very likely explanation of how a Thom came about. But even more importantly, I would answer the critics by saying that if somehow the equation of creation was tied to a physical aspect of man, that makes the equation all the more remarkable and astonishing and interesting. And so we have this remarkable signature of God on his creation, which basically says, I took eternal elements and I organized and created them into a moon and an earth, and here's my signature, just like the signature of an artist on his painting. Well, if you don't believe in God, you may not see that signature. Alma said, all things denote there is a God, yea, even the earth, and all things that are upon the face of it, yea, and its motion, yea, and also all the planets which move in their regular form do witness that there is a supreme creator. You either have eyes to see and ears to hear, or you don't. But in our search for extraterrestrial intelligence, perhaps we just found it here in this wonderful equation.